Welcome to the Tripod.
So welcome to the business of photography. Our guest today is a large format 8x10 film photographer. He pioneered the landscape photography blog on YouTube by creating interesting and impactful video journals on his travels through Zion National Park, Death Valley and the Redwoods on the west coast of America. His patience is unrivaled as he creates incredible landscape photographs. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Ben Horne. Ben, it's an absolute honour to have you on. We've been looking forward to this all week. How are you getting on?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey Ben, how are you?
Pretty good. Just I don't know, just getting ready to get out there on a trip at some point, but not quite yet, but hopefully soon. I'm excited to get out there again at some point after all this is done.
Yeah, I think things seem to be picking up globally now. Fingers crossed. I don't want to jinx something, not that I'll have much of a difference on it, but things seem to be picking up. So yeah, hopefully everyone will be out soon and we'll all get to do a bit of shooting here and there. And I know Sean is itching to get out there as well. He's another landscape photographer, so.
Oh yeah, chomping at the bit. But I think the beauty of landscape photography is that generally where we be going to shoot, we'll be socially distancing anyway, because there's no one else around us. You know?
Yeah,
so,
and that's I think that was the reason why so many of us do that, just to kind of get away from the crowds and the people and all that. So
exactly. Definitely. So maybe they should just leave landscape photographers out for like the next, leave us out early.
The landscape photography passport.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm not as lucky. I have. Yeah. I can't imagine I'll have a gig this year, which is it's upsetting. It's not great. So, I'm emotional about it, but it's okay.
We feel
you could just come shooting with me, Kev.
Yeah, I mean, look, landscapes and all are cool. I do dabble in landscapes and all sorts of everything, but it's so many cool gigs lined up this year that it's still a hard one to take.
Yeah.
It seems like that's gonna be like over a year really before some of that starts to sort of open back up again, and at what capacity? That's definitely something that's been hit very hard. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
So, as much as we feel for you, Kev, we have Ben on today because Ben.
Yeah, so we're not here to talk about you, Kevin. Okay, sorry, but
as Kevin said, he's a talker. But Ben, you exclusively shoot film, and specifically 8x10 film, I believe. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a bit about the gear involved and 8x10 film in general and how it works?
So the cameras themselves are actually pretty darn simple. It's about as simple as it really gets. They look big and intimidating and bulky, but it's just a light box with a lens on one side, and then there's a plastic or wood film holder. You put the film on the other side, and but the 8x10 camera, the film measures 8x10 inches, and so you can get some pretty awesome quality. But it's a very slow process. It's something that really makes you think ahead of the light and think through the whole process. I shoot all color, and so with color film, especially slide film, there's very little. You basically have to have a perfect exposure, and you also have a very limited dynamic range. So it really kind of forces you to rethink things and find the things you can photograph, which is usually subjects in calm light and stuff like that. But it's definitely a very in-depth process, and I think that's something that I really need as a photographer, because otherwise I might kind of cut corners and not really do what it takes in order to get the sort of work that I'm really satisfied with. But it's still alive and kicking even in the digital era.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it there, Ben, when you said the process, and this is probably one of the biggest things I admire about you and your work. I find sometimes when I'm out shooting a landscape and it's kind of really good conditions, kind of wild conditions like what we'd often have here in Ireland, I find myself just snapping, just literally, there's a composition, there's a shot, there's a shot, there's a shot. And sometimes I have to pull myself back and say, hang on, I actually have to think about this a bit more. Whereas when you're shooting your film, it's such a strategic process, and it's actually so calming to watch your videos because it's so step by step and thorough, and you're thinking about everything from your composition to light to your exposure, and even the process of setting up your camera and your gear and your exposure and your film. Do you find that helps you kind of create the image, because you're thinking about the image from start to finish? you know.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's one of the things with the whole process is it's very limiting, which would seem like it would be something we wouldn't want as photographers. I mean, like if you're buying like whatever the latest and greatest digital camera is that's out there, and you know within the specs there's some glaring thing like, oh yeah, you can take like 3 pictures a day and then the camera shuts off. You know, something like that would just be seen as like, how could such a camera exist? You know, how could someone work with that degree of limitation? But when you actually have to work within those sort of limitations, there's actually something kind of comforting about it, because if you're out and there's like some crazy light going on, or there's so many beautiful things all around you, if you have a camera that can do everything, then it's really hard to limit it to what it is you actually do want to shoot.
Yes.
But if you have a camera that's very limiting, you can just be like, well, I can't shoot that. That's not going to work out well. The wind's blowing too strong over here. Maybe I can, find a shot over here on the ground somewhere. And it really gives a sense of direction, which I find I really need for what I'm doing. That's also one of the reasons why I like returning to the same sort of locations. Just because if I go to an area that's completely new to me, I'll get overwhelmed by just everything all around me. So
yes,
and the limitation really
find
is
it
kind of
tough. Yeah, you'd find it tough then to, when you're overwhelmed by a new location, to actually think about, okay, well, where do I actually want to shoot? Because you haven't done kind of your scouting yet, or you haven't found kind of compositions and thought them through it probably.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think it takes. I don't know if you feel the same way, but like for me, it takes like maybe 3 visits to a location before I finally start producing the work I'm really more satisfied with.
Yes.
Usually things that I find at first that really catch my eye, it's like surface level stuff. It's like the easy shots. But the more you kind of return to an area, you kind of get a better feeling for it and start producing higher quality work. And so I think that's kind of where the camera forces me to slow down, forces me to go back to the same areas over and over again, which I think are traits that would kind of make anyone better at the type of photography that they want to do. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's so cool. I actually want to ask one more question about in terms of the gear. I saw there in one of your Instagram posts, and you said you used a Nikon 150mm lens.
Yeah.
So, like, see, this is because I don't know anything about film and writing. So, like, it looked like a wide-angle shot. How do like the lenses work? Because obviously a wide angle for what I'd be using would be like a 7-14, or if you're shooting full frame, it'd be a 14-24 or something. So, like, how does that work in the film world?
So basically, as the sensor size gets bigger, or in this case, the film gets bigger, the focal lengths kind of expand with it. So the 150mm Nikon lens that I use, which looks like this big hourglass, it's equivalent to about a 20mm on a full frame camera. So it's a factor of like 6 or 7, depending on how you do the math.
Yes.
So like a normal lens is something kind of around a 300 or so. But also the lenses they're all really slow lenses. They're like f9, f11. But there's still, some of them are like 95mm thread sizes and all that. But also with large format, the depth of field is insanely shallow. Because if you're to think about it, if you had a full frame camera with like a 150mm lens, which is a kind of a medium longish lens, and then you take a bunch of pictures in a matrix to make something that's equivalent to 8x10, you're shooting something wide angle, but with a shallow depth of field. It's kind of trippy in kind of a weird way.
That's really
Yeah, it is.
interesting. That's a good way of putting it, yeah.
So you've used an aperture of like f45, like f,
Oh, yeah.
really massive f stuff. Like, that's
And
just trying to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, and f45 does not give very much depth of field. It'd be like shooting maybe like f8, maybe 5, 6 or something like that on a full frame camera, where you can't get a whole landscape in focus at just f45. So you're like tilting the lenses and all kinds of things in order to get more in focus. But yeah, f45 is like my go-to aperture for like everything.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So Ben,
It's a whole different world.
in the digital age we're living in, we're used to clicking the shutter and seeing the results. So what are the steps in the process from choosing your film to exposing it and then developing it? Do you develop your own film, or does it go out to labs, or what way does the process work?
So I use mostly color slide film. And with color slide film, you have to have like really specifically accurate temperatures for development and all that sort of stuff. And so there's machines you can buy to do that. They're like about $3,000 or so for a machine that can do the film processing. I really don't shoot enough film to do that, so I use a lab. And I think it's about like $8 or $10 per sheet to get it developed. And so overall, it's about $30 for every click of the shutter. But with film, each film stock is going to have kind of a different look to it. And so you choose the film based on the scene. And like Provia from Fuji, it's a slide film, 100-speed film. And then another one I use is Velvia, which is a 50-speed film, which has more contrast and saturation. But the crazy thing with film is color negative film. That has a huge dynamic range. Like the highlights go on kind of forever. It's like the opposite of digital, whereas like the shadows go on for quite a while. So if I'm shooting a scene, it has like a really, really strong contrast. Color negative film works great. Otherwise, I'll choose a slide film that's going to work pretty well for the scene. But yeah, so I mean, that all gets loaded in the film holders ahead of time. I take with me into the field what I plan on using for the day. I can usually carry maybe 4 film holders, so I take like 8 shots, which would be a lot.
That's crazy. that like I've taken more than 8 photographs today, and I haven't been anywhere. You know, literally, it's a different world. It is a completely different world.
It is, but the other thing too is like it takes so long to set up the camera that by the time you kind of get everything going, by the time you take that one photo, it feels like you've taken like 100 photos. So it's like, it's kind of weird the way that all works out. Like I'll set up for a photo of a scene, and then I'll shoot the photo. There might be something else that's like nearby that looks pretty good as well, but I'm like, I don't feel like taking a picture of that other thing. I'm just going to do that one thing, and then that's all good.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, look, you do obviously, you create these incredible video journals on your YouTube channel, which I was only watching one of the Death Valley ones again last night. Like, out of curiosity, does any part of your workflow involve digital photography?
Outside the video, no, not really. I know some people that they'll take a digital camera and then they'll take like a preview exposure to kind of get a feeling for what the film's going to look like in the exposure. The problem with that is you got to do some math, because like there's certain settings that just don't exist between the two different formats. So like if I'm shooting a picture at f/45 and like I have a digital camera, I'm going to take a picture of like a test photo. It goes down to maybe like 16 or something like that, maybe 22.
Yeah.
Like I guess doing math, and I was an art major. I'm not a big math person.
Good man.
Yeah.
Same here.
Does film speed relate to ISO in any way, or are they very different?
Oh, that's actually one of the things that is exactly the same between film and digital.
Cool.
You know, yeah, with apertures and stuff, you're kind of using different apertures just because the lenses are different. And shutter speeds are the same as well. But there are some weird things that like with doing long exposures and stuff, some films are really horrible at that. So like if your light meter tells you to do like a 5-minute long exposure, you got to look up like a chart. It says, no, that 5-minute exposure, you actually got to do 25 minutes. So like,
wow.
Because otherwise if you just did 5 minutes, your picture's dark. So like digital has its problems, like with long exposures, pixels dying and noise and stuff. Film's not all that amazing either in that regard. So it's tough either way.
So different films will suit different exposures. So different exposures.
Yeah, totally.
And whatnot.
Yeah, like one of the films I use, Provia, you can go up to 15 minutes without having to do any correction. But another film I use, after 1 minute, you have to start doubling your exposures, and then it gets even worse beyond there. Black and white's crazy. There are some black and white films where if the meter tells you to use like, I don't know, like a minute long exposure, you look at the chart and it says, 1 minute equals 45 minutes. It's some of them are just like impossible
insane.
to use. Oh yeah. Yeah, so
this
is like the learning curve.
Sometimes you I often see you mention in your videos that you're like, well, I don't know, have I got a shot until you get home and you develop it. No, I'd imagine at this stage of your career, you are fairly certain when you have gotten a shot because you've got the experience and you know. But when you were starting out, was there ever times you came home and you just totally didn't get the image that you were looking for?
Well, even to this day, it's still like, you still don't really know. And the reason is that film has its own interpretation of a scene, and sometimes you think you know what's going to happen, but when you get the film back, either you'll love it or you'll hate it. So there's a lot of times where you don't really know. The other thing I've learned is that if I go on a trip, and if there's like that one photo I'm really thinking about, that one photo that I think is going to turn out really good, usually that one turns out horrifically bad. And so like I try not to get my expectations up, because I've been burned so many times where I'm like, oh, I have like this good good composition, good subject, good light. I get it back, I look at it, I'm like, I hate it. I don't know what happened. And I guess there's probably an equivalent to that in digital as well, where there's that one photo you really want to look at and you've already seen it, in the back of the camera, but you get back and then there's those other like sneaky photos that you didn't think much of at the moment.
That's so
but
true.
then they kind
That
of grow
happens
on
to
you.
me all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
It's so true.
There's something
It's
about having
like
that separation of time. Yeah.
Yeah. And something else that kind of popped into my head when you were talking about that is, and it always happens to me, I don't know, does it happen to him else, but I could be looking at a scene and I'm like, God, that looks really nice, and I could take a picture of it, and when I look at the back of a camera, it just doesn't look half as nice or something. And I think that's a lot of that is probably down to like we can perceive depth obviously with our eyes, whereas a camera can't perceive depth in terms of like when you're looking at the back of a screen or anything. But yeah, that's as you said, it's the sneaky ones then that you give it a few weeks and you look back over your image, you're like, God, I completely forgot about that one. And those are the ones that often turn out to be the best.
Oh yeah.
That happened to me
Do you
today.
do mostly color?
Mostly color, yeah. Mostly color, yeah.
Yeah, that's for me. That's one of the challenges, because there'll be scenes where I love the scenes how it looked in real life, and then the photo never does it justice. And I find that that's definitely one of the difficult things with color photography, because we have our own perception of things, and if something's off by a little bit, it just doesn't capture it. But that is one of the cool things about black and white, though, because it's kind of an abstraction of reality, anyways.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
No, I'm a massive post-processing nerd, as everyone listening to this podcast, yeah, they all know. I love post-processing. I spend hours just resetting images and going over them again and again and just trying to learn new techniques and different styles. So like, in terms of, a lot of listeners to this podcast would be familiar with post-processing in relation to a digital photography world. What's the post-processing for film photography?
It's pretty darn simple, really. So since I shoot mostly slide film, what you see is what you get in terms of, there's no hidden information in the shadows. There's no hidden information in the highlights. So just so long as you did all your proper work when you're taking the photo and you have a good exposure, it's just a matter of scanning that in, and now you have a TIFF file of whatever. There's different ways to scan it, but basically you end up with this really high grade TIFF file. But there's really no recovering shadow detail. There's no recovering highlight detail. It's mostly just kind of like a tweak of the curves, just to kind of, you scan images really flat, just because you want to try to capture as much as you can. Kind of the same general way as if you're taking a digital picture, you want to get all that information. But yeah, then you're just adjusting the curves. You're maybe tweaking for some situations where maybe the film got the color wrong or something was off a little bit. But you don't really have that same level of post-processing as with digital, because you already have a file that's already pretty well mapped out from your dark tone to your light tone. If the detail is there, you can work with it, but it really is actually very, very simple by comparison. There's not much learning curve compared to what you do have to do on digital to kind of massage all this information out of the files that's kind of trapped in there.
Yeah. So I suppose, so you're saying like film, the files that you process aren't as flexible, I suppose you could say.
Exactly.
So but like you mentioned there, if the film doesn't get the color quite right, can you bring that color back to a certain extent, or?
Oh yeah, you can. I mean, you don't have. It's not quite the same as like with a raw file, where the file doesn't really. It's not really materialized in anything yet. It's not really. Here you already have a file that already, if something's blue, it's blue. So you can kind of adjust things the same as if you have like just like a really high quality TIFF file coming out of a camera. You can tweak everything that Photoshop can tweak, but you just don't have quite as much flexibility in terms of like what we can do with digital. It's kind of with slide film. It's kind of like you're shooting with a print already in mind. Like it's already optimized kind of for print. But it makes it so you have to make a lot more decisions in the field to get things perfect.
Yeah.
But after
so
that,
cool.
it's actually easier process than digital. Yeah.
Yeah. It's because like a what you see is what you get kind of shot, and
For sure.
that's
And also,
that's so cool.
yeah, it is actually kind of liberating to get away from like the intensive post-processing side of things.
Yeah, I imagine so.
I hear that, yeah.
Yeah.
You can
but
get
for-
carried away as well. I often
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, you can. Like you can go down a rabbit hole, and then so that is really cool. That's really liberating, I'd imagine. So
And it's also nice because you can take like the film, put it on a light box, kind of have it set next to your computer and kind of look over at that. Like this is the original. And then you look at your computer screen. And more often than not, I'm just trying to get them to be pretty darn close. If I'm not just making up for some sort of mistake or something where the film got it wrong.
Yeah.
And when you scan it in, so do you scan the film then into the, once it's developed, so you just scan it into your computer? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so I have a flatbed scanner made by Epson, which does a good job. But if I'm really gonna get like if I want to have like the best of the best, they have these scanners called drum scanners. They look like something from like some sort of like science fiction movie where it's like the film gets wrapped around a clear cylinder, which then gets mounted in this vertical machine that spins it really, really fast with like a light that extends into the middle of it. And it like scans it a pixel at a time. But those scans are crazy expensive. It could be a couple $100 per scan.
Wow.
But that's where you can get like 700 megapixel file out of it. So if like someone orders a print, I'll have the image drum scanned. But if it's just for myself, it's hard to justify that. But once you have that file, then just bring it in Photoshop and edit how you would edit any Photoshop file.
Yeah, I mean that's a testament to you as a photographer, even Ben. Just because when you look at your images, how stunning they are, and like you've done that all practically in the field. Through your experience, through your skill, through your thought process. You haven't created that. Do you know what I mean? I'm trying not to sound like a fanboy. I really hold it back now, because me personally, like, I know that you like no Photoshop or anything or any post processing will make up for like poor composition or poor technique when you're shooting. But I often love manipulating an image in Photoshop to create different light and different tones and textures. Do you know what I mean? But when you're able to create such a pleasing shot solely out in the field, like in camera, it's absolutely class. Yeah, it's so cool. It's just so cool.
That. And actually one of the coolest experiences of shooting film is looking at that film on a light table with a loop. And it's something that, as much as I would love to have some way of showing that, like with the YouTube videos, there's no real experience for that because your brain thinks you're looking through your little loop at reality. And sometimes it's a little frustrating because you see this film on this light box, you look at it, it looks like 3-dimensional, even though it's not. You scan it in, it's never gonna look the same. You make it print, it's never gonna look the same. But there's something about that, and it does kind of make you work harder in the field to try to get things to be just right. And that's also one of the reasons why at the end of the videos, I always have like a clip of me like putting the film I shot that day kind of like on a light box at the end, so you can kind of see this is the end result here, to give, I don't know, some degree of a little bit of that experience. But if you ever have a chance to shoot some slide film, especially large format, or to look at it with a loop, it's totally worth it. It'll transform the way you see things. It's a really cool experience.
I'd say it's so rewarding. Absolutely. And as you said, like when you see the cameras, they seem so intimidating, and like it's like they're a minefield nearly. You're like, well, where do I begin? But I'd imagine once you get into it, it becomes a natural workflow, the same as someone who's shooting with. So.
And what you find is that actually it looks complicated, but it makes, if you're to do like the digital equivalent to that, what you find is that the process of working a large format camera, it could be a little more time consuming, but it's actually a little bit easier and you can do more in camera. Just simple things like being able to take the front lens and then drop it down just a little bit at an angle, kind of tip it forward. You take your plane of focus and you drop it down kind of, tilt shift style.
Yeah.
But like I can take photos where I can fix perspective in camera. I can tweak the perspective in camera where I can take the foreground and enlarge it or kind of shrink it down. There's been scenes where there was a photo I was shooting, it wasn't composing quite right. But then you take the back of the camera, kind of tilt it at an angle, and all of a sudden you enlarge the foreground, and all of a sudden it fits in that composition where it's not cheating, but it
That's so cool.
I don't know.
That's
right?
amazing.
That is so cool. Yeah, it's
just-
like it's like a distortion, like what you'll be creating in Lightroom or something, like fixing
Yeah,
distortion. That's
it's the same. It's the same idea as like Photoshop or Lightroom, where you can just like let's say that there is like this like pesky mountain, just like poking into the shot you didn't want there, and you just kind of like stretch the image, kind of like a trapezoid shape, and then all of a sudden that mountain kind of scoots out of your frame. It's not there anymore. Like you could do that in camera.
Oh man.
So it takes a little more effort, but afterwards, once you have that film exposed, you're not spending all that time like focus stacking and doing all that sort of stuff on the computer because you did it in camera. Yeah.
That is so cool. I mean, and for people listening to this, Ben, what would be your best technical tip for someone who would like to explore the wonderful world that is film photography?
I want to. After hearing this.
That's a good question. I don't know. I guess it depends on how you learn. But for me, it was just getting a camera and just going out. You got to make a ton of mistakes. I mean, just like anything, there's all kinds of mistakes you got to go through. And with large format, there's a multitude of ways of messing up. But I just bought myself a used camera and I took it out. I took a bunch of horrible pictures and they started getting a little better with time. And the biggest learning curves are learning to use a light meter, because you got to use an external light meter, learning each type of film. The cameras themselves, I mean, you could just like Intrepid, which is based over in the UK. They make really affordable 4x5 and 8x10 cameras. They're made out of plywood, it's kind of crazy. They're lightweight, but they're strong. All the lenses are typically, you'd be buying those used because they're not around new anymore. They're not that expensive, but I think it's just get out there, make mistakes, learn. But like I said, if you shoot some slides and you look at that with a loop on a light box, like magic. It is really, really cool.
I would imagine so. I mean, like I was only saying to the lads last week that I don't print my own photos. I never do. It's just something I've never done. So I never get to see my photos as this physical piece. So you get that all the time on the light box, essentially, and that's.
Oh yeah.
I'd say the reward is it's beautiful.
And you really should print your photos. I mean, there is something really rewarding about that because you learn so much in the process. I mean, it's kind of crazy because like I'll print a photo and there'll be something that like I can look at that photo on my computer monitor and I'll be completely blind to something. I print it, I look at it, and I just see it completely differently. And then circling back around, then it allows me to kind of see things differently when I'm shooting the photos or what's going to work. So even, I mean, I've got a pretty big printer like over my shoulder over there. You probably can't see it, but yeah, it is pretty rewarding to do your own prints just because you can pick up so much from it. It's kind of crazy.
Do you find, Ben, like you kind of touched on it there, do you ever kind of leave I assume you do, leave an image sit for a couple of weeks and then come back to it with fresh eyes, and you'd often see things that you didn't see like immediately after you shot it, or kind of
for sure.
in the post-processing stage, like?
Yeah, I'm actually going through the process right now of rescanning a bunch of old sheets of film for a book that's coming out, and it's kind of crazy because there are some photos. I mean, there might be a scene I maybe shot maybe 3 or 4 different frames on that particular scene with some subtle differences between them. Maybe it's the light, maybe other things as well. And, maybe it was 4 years ago that I shot the photo and I chose one of those sheets of film. I scanned it. Then going for this book I'm working, I'm going through all those original 3 sheets. I'm looking at it now. I'm like, why did I choose this one? This one's not as good as this other one. So our perception definitely changes with time, and I think when the memory of shooting that photo is very fresh in our mind, we kind of see it one way, and then after some time has passed, and we don't really remember that experience anymore. We look at it in a completely different way, and so I think it's really important to kind of go back through your old work, because you're going to find probably some of the better photos that way. And it is pretty crazy how perception changes like that. And it's been a really good experience going through. And I mean, I updated probably 4 pictures in my portfolio with different versions that are, in my perspective now, they're clearly the better shot, though I didn't realize it at the time. So it is really cool to go back and do that.
I don't think there isn't a photographer now. Like, sorry, Kev. I don't think there's a photographer now that isn't going back through their images. Is that what you're going to say, Kev?
Yeah, that is the main
pandemic,
benefit of this lockdown. Like,
yeah.
Like I
There's
even
so many people
dug out
going
a
out through
couple of
images.
photos from like 3-4 years ago that I had like completely disregarded at the time.
Yeah.
And now, you know, you look at it and you go, you know what? It's actually not as bad as I thought it was, and it turns out to be quite good. So
Yeah.
it is the benefit of this.
It is. It's like at the time you shot it, like, and you mentioned it there, it's like it kind of blurs your vision. Whereas when you come back to the shot then a few months later or whatever, it's like you've got a new perspective, you've got a fresh style, possibly you've fresh eyes, and it's actually more rewarding in itself. Like, I think there isn't any photographer right now that hasn't gone back through their portfolios or their catalogue of images. Do you know what I mean? Over the last few months or weeks.
Kevin's been attacked by a jaguar.
I had to kick my cats out of the room because otherwise they'd be doing the exact same thing right now.
Yeah.
So
Peter
this,
just wanted to be famous.
This conversation has been lovely and informative, and Ben, you've been great. But what we have done in our youth and our wisdom on the podcast is we've set up these questions that we decided we'd ask every guest. But now in hindsight, I don't think they're fit for purpose, but I think we'll go for it anyway and make a fool of ourselves with our quickfire round.
Awesome.
So if you just want to rattle off the answer to each question, and we'll try to get through it quickly and painlessly. So number 1, what camera accessory can you not leave home without?
For me, shooting film would be a light meter. Light meter is the most important thing. I carry 2 of them because if it breaks, my guessing isn't very good. Yeah.
Lovely. That one worked. Okay, here we go. Number 2. If you were to use one lens for the rest of your life, what would it be?
For my setup, it'd be probably a 240 millimeter Fuji lens, which equates to probably about 28 millimeter on a full frame. Tiny little lens, 52 millimeter thread size, little tiny lens, but it's sharp, and I've been loving that focal length.
Are all lenses, sorry, I know I'm interrupting quick fire round, but
Wouldn't be like you at all, Sean.
I'm so curious, like, are all lenses fixed focal length in film?
Yeah, they're all going to
Okay.
be a fixed focal length lens. No zooms exist in the large format world.
Yeah. Okay, so they're all prime lenses, so essentially kind of.
They're all primes. One more limitation. Yeah.
Yeah, limitation, or like, I mean, prime lenses generally are the sharpest out of anything. Obviously, you don't have the versatility of a zoom, but once again, you have to think a lot more now about your composition and when you have a fixed focal length.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Sean, because it's about to fall apart here. Mr. Ben Horne, RAW or JPEG?
Well, TIFF, I guess.
We'll take
that's what my scans are.
We're
So
actually going to
I'll
add
plead
TIFF in
TIFF.
now. That's a good answer.
Yeah.
We'll add TIFF in for future guests.
Yeah, there won't be many people that'll choose it because they're probably going to be shooting a lot of RAW or JPEG, but TIFF works, yeah.
We'll take it.
We'll
Thank
take
you.
it 100%. I suspect I know the answer to this, but we'll go with it. Favorite camera brand?
I'll do 2 parts. I'll do a film and I'll do a digital. So for film, my primary camera is an Arca Swiss. I love that camera. It's super precise. I also have an Intrepid camera, which I love, backpacking, lightweight. So those are my 2 for film. For digital, I use a Sony for everything. So I'm Sony on the digital side, but that's all on the video side.
Yep. Cool.
Sony are the hot property in digital at the moment. They kind of do it all, really.
Yeah. Yeah,
For video,
I've been very
A7S2.
happy with it. Yep. Yeah.
They're a
I've got
beast,
A7S2 and I have a RX 105A. I had a 5, but it drowned in a river. But I didn't, so.
That is a really good way of looking at it, Ben. That is
Yeah.
a really good way of looking at it.
So on to the final question in this thrilling quickfire round.
That's taken 24 minutes.
It always takes long.
That is my fault. I will put my hand up. I can never last a quick fire round without asking a question in the middle.
Ben Horne, clarity, yes or no?
I don't. I'm familiar with the concept of it, but I don't use clarity on the scans now. I have a lot of clarity already with the files. There's I'm good.
Awesome.
I'll pass on that one.
I think you passed that, Ben, with flying colours.
Awesome.
Well done.
In fairness. So a boula bus, which is a clap from all of us.
Nice.
You survived the tripod experience. But on a serious note, Ben, thanks a million for coming on. That was a great conversation. I
So
found
interesting,
myself
yeah.
sitting here zoning out and just being like, wow, like the information you got across there was fantastic. So thanks a million for coming on. But as you were on, I'd like to give Ben a chance to plug his socials and his website and any other stuff you may wish to plug.
Yeah, so my website is benhorne.com. That's benhorne.com. And that will link to YouTube and everything else. But on Instagram, I'm Ben Horne Photo. On Twitter, I'm Ben Horne. And on YouTube, just search for, but it's all linked to from my website, benhorne.com.
Oh, I'm sure people will be able to find you. Yeah, Ben, no bother in that. That was class, Ben. That was genuinely, that was so interesting. My head I'm just trying to process everything. Just all the information in terms of lenses and just everything. It's very interesting though. I think people are really going to enjoy
It's like another language, but you kind of get used to it, you know? It just becomes normal.
Yeah.
Just like anything. Yeah.
Well, Ben, I'm literally lost for words because I was looking forward to this all week and you certainly delivered. Thanks a million for coming on to the tripod from myself, Kevin and his cat, and Sean.
Well, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Let's talk photography.